All right. My apologies, folks. I had a different program and something happened to my machine at the last minute, and I had a hard time making a link. So I'm going to start off with a partial program, but basically we had approached the Dallas School District in Luzerne County for the improvements to stormwater basins that were basically set up for attenuating floodwaters. The basins were mowed and they were a maintenance headache. There was barren vegetation, mowed grass, and virtually the only reason the basins were established in their original form was for flood control. As I approached the school district, I had discussions with them and talked to them about the maintenance and difficulty in operating the basins was actually dangerous for their maintenance staff. So I invited the maintenance staff to the first meeting with some school district managers and talked to them about all the different benefits that we could have by basically turning these basins into wetland systems. The wetland systems would then allow a wide variety of fisheries and wildlife or wildlife species to take over and use these basins and turn them into optimum conditions for doing this, doing on-site education and a variety of things. And in the meantime, we would be meeting some MS4 requirements in reducing sediments and nutrient runoff and capturing them in the emergent vegetation and trees and shrubs. As the basins started to grow out, cattails are naturally occurring in most of these areas. The stormwater basins in the post-planning view were just mowed basins with nothing in the bottom. Now they're 12-foot cattails. We have elderberry, winterberry, red-winged blackbird nesting, toads and frogs spawning in the wet areas of the basins, and we have a pretty excellent situation. Now this is the pre-planting of the basins. Notice the deep tire tracks in the bottom and where they're getting tractors stuck, sliding down into the muck. And now the basin has grown into a much better vegetation composition, which traps sediments and removes sediments in the vegetative state. And the trees and shrubs are emerging out of the vegetation on the three different basins, creating much better habitat. And also, all of the stormwater basins that are on the school district property are discharging to a cold water fishery. So when you have blacktop pavement and rooftops running off in the dead of summer, the water has time to attenuate the temperature to a cooler surrounding with the dense vegetation that it flows through. The capture of sediments, the uptake of nutrients, evapotranspiration of that moisture to the atmosphere in the growing season is all beneficial in the MS4 realm of benefits that are occurring at the Dallas School District. Additionally, we have some spectacular use of these for environmental education on site, which was part of the sales discussion to the school district, that basically we have on-site laboratories for the students to study anything from frogs and toads, green frogs, American toads that are breeding in the system, red-winged blackbirds nesting in the cattails, as well as water quality enhancement in these surroundings. One of the things that I run into many cases with public image, it looks unkept. And one of the things, and I'm hoping that the slides aren't in this section, but I recommended beautiful plantings that are native. elderberry, which come into flower in the early part of the late part of spring, early summer, and produce fruit for the birds in the fall. Winterberry, which has excellent fruit, beautiful fruit in the wintertime. Now, we're not worried about beauty in MS4s, but ultimately, when people complain about unkept areas, it's a natural environment. These vegetations, if they're selected properly, actually beautify, bring pollinators and songbirds and a variety of uses to the basins, which also give the students something to study about the biology and botany. We went from 27 plant species prior to the basin planting to over 50 species, including volunteers. So any school teachers that want to start children into in high schools, there's all different levels of school education on these sites. They can actually take the students out and do botany courses, water quality courses, bird and frog and amphibian. And also with the frog production that has introduced itself naturally into this basin, the mosquitoes are non-existent. I walked through the 12-foot cattails in the dead of summer and I have no mosquitoes hovering about me. So basically, if you've got a good amphibian population that'll volunteer to the surrounding, you'll have even better surroundings and less likelihood of need for treatment of mosquitoes. One thing I did learn is pick fast-growing vegetation. People are impatient, and we are looking to meet these requirements as quickly as possible. Herbaceous comes in quickly. But if you get into elderberry, they grow very quickly. We've got 7-foot elderberries that were only planted 2 years ago, full of flowers and fruit for this coming summer. We have river birch. We have a variety of wet and moist soil species. We're putting tulip trees on the higher banks, red maples on the higher banks, and then wetland species, river birch, sycamore down in the wet bottoms. And then the diversity actually creates a better surrounding. These types of apparatuses in the overall stormwater basin plantings do wonders in the MS4 and downstream watersheds. Now, these old basins in the upper picture here, no vegetation, just rock inlets, rock outlets, and attenuate the flows. But when you get the vegetation, that vegetation traps sediments. Yesterday, we had nearly 2-inch rainstorm inside of an hour. And the basins were literally flooded at 2.5 feet deep. Now you're getting a lot of water out of those basins without time to come in contact with the vegetations. But under normal flow events, they do a considerable amount of improvement to the water quality in the system. So basically, I think my apologies for the program. I had a little bit broader program for this, and hopefully tomorrow's session I'll have it all straightened out. That program this was part of the program, and but there's a ton of things that we can do to benefit water quality on school district properties. I have a couple of the other school districts that are interested at the present time, and I'm hoping to bring them to the MS4 realm in planting the basins and turning them into somewhat man-made wetland systems that will benefit both the education as well as the water quality of the MS4 surroundings in the municipalities and the districts and watersheds that they're in. We certainly have a lot of places to go with these different systems. And, I'd be glad to help anyone with specific species selection. Some of the supports that we got was PARC&D for financial support, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation 10 Million Trees the watershed stewards of northeastern Pennsylvania, based out of the Penn State Ag Extension offices. And the watershed stewards aided me in the planting and also helped me to write the grant and secure the vegetations. So we have a whole bunch of volunteers and involved people. And in some cases, bringing students out to plant the trees and shrubs gives them a better understanding of all of these things. They get a short discussion of the water quality enhancements. And now as the trees and shrubs grow, these will be more prolific. The cattails may be subdued at that time, but most of the trees and shrubs will be around the boundary, and they will attenuate some of the flow to evapotranspiration that comes out of the basins. We're not diminishing the original intent of the basin, but we are actually improving the water quality while creating educational laboratories on the site. I think I'm done for now. I would like to open up for any questions if there's questions available at the present time.
Okay. There's some questions for John. Please either put them in the chat, or if you, at this point you want to raise your hand, you can come off mute and ask your question directly. John, looks like we have one question coming in on the chat. Is there any educational signage?
Is there any educational time?
Signage.
I have educational slides. Is that what they're asking? I'm sorry.
No, I think they're asking, did you put any signs at the...
Oh, signs. We have not done signage yet. I need to find financing for the signing because that's critically important. It actually reduces some of the complaints when people walk up and expect a basin to be mowed perfectly. That's definitely something I hope to get in the ground in the very near future so people better understand why the basins are grown up in native vegetation. It's an excellent question, and I'm certainly looking for financing on that aspect of the projects.
Okay. Another question is, does the school district have a separate MS4 permit, or are they considered part of the township or county?
They're part of the township system. In this school district, they're actually under the Dallas Area Municipal Authority general permit for for 3 municipalities. So I'm aiding DAMA and the school district at the same time, so that the school district reduces their maintenance, is contributing to the benefits of the MS4 of DAMA, but also getting their educational laboratories on site in the school district. So it kind of fills 3 slots with one approach.
Okay. I have another question. Is this project part of a PRP?
Yes, it is. The Toby's Creek watershed overall is a cold water fishery with wild brown trout throughout its basin. And the temperature attenuation when you get into vegetated basins instead of flood attenuation basins is considerable. Water temperatures coming off of 140-degree pavement and rubber roofing, and then going into a basin, getting into the shaded area where we're not only benefiting nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction, but we're also considerably reducing water temperatures before it enters into the Toby's Creek watershed. So there's so many facets of these things, some things that I perhaps haven't even thought about at this point. But it certainly is a neat way to approach a new way to meet the requirements with the old style flood attenuation basins and vegetate them and improve water quality and temperatures downstream. So it's something that I have tested on Dallas School District, and I have several other schools that are interested in the project. I still have to get through school district interest to make sure that they're on board before we get to finding financing and planting for their basins, but it certainly is working out well.
Okay, great. Sorry, I missed a question that came through in the chat. It says, has there been any issues with too many snakes, frogs, etc.?
I have not seen a snake on the site yet. We've only been in the ground for 3 years. Now, frogs, they are present, and American toads are all over the place. And green frogs and wood frogs, I'm anticipating eventually in the future, as these basins mature and get more and more use by amphibians, we have a forested wetland right across the road that the volunteer frogs are coming into, and toads. I'm assuming they're coming from those locations. So I can only hope in the future that we might have a close down of the roads for frog crossings at certain times of the year. But we'll wait for that to actually happen. There's quite I know today when I was walking around in the Cattails early this morning, just to see if I could get some additional photos of frogs. My apologies, that original program, I had pictures of all different things and discussions of different things. There was frogs moving all through the water this morning. There was 2.5 feet in these basins yesterday with the extreme rain events that we had. So I'm anticipating in a couple of years we might actually have enough frogs that they might be migrating from the woods, especially the wood frogs. Green frogs stay in the aquatic systems. The American toads may migrate to this location for reproduction. And so we may run into that at a later date. I can only hope that that might occur.
Okay. We have another question coming in through the chat. Did you already go through the process, or are there plans in the works to get credit for the students to use this as a sort of living classroom for environmental education classes?
That would be a great idea. I like the idea. I have not approached that angle of the educational aspect. Initially, when I approached the school district, the biology teacher brought students out to help me plant, and we talked about doing more detailed studies. And at the time, there was a strike coming and a variety of things, and things kind of got set on a back burner. Things have all settled down now. It's time for me to reinvest it in that idea. Certainly my email is here. If you have any ideas, I'd be wide open to hearing credits. That's a great idea, and I haven't really thought about the details of bringing students in. I know the shop teachers and the students build bird houses. I'm looking at hopefully them putting bat houses out as well, that will further get the students actively involved in using these basins as more of a study focused area for environmental education. So I'm open to any educational aspects that might bring about more interest in the basins.
Okay. So, John, how long does it usually take for the basin to be implemented? I assume there was a lot of collaboration and coordination with the school, and then through the process of implementation and planting, how long does that take?
I think from the time I had the meeting with the school till the time we actually planted the basins was about a year and a half. Because I had to get their agreement that it was okay to do the basin planting. I had to receive approval from the township engineer to make sure that they weren't, that the school district wasn't in violation of any of the stormwater regulations in the municipal realm. So I actually went to township meetings to meet with the engineer and talk to the supervisors. So there's some legwork involved. And then once we got everyone's sign off that it was agreeable that we do this type of planting in the basins, then we wrote the grant with the watershed stewards and received funding from RC&D. But then additionally, we had the Chesapeake Bay 10 million trees, which I've been active for a number of years on riparian zones, got approval from them to use some of their trees and shrubs. And so we did 2 plantings, one initially from stock bought for the basins, and then we added some additional trees from Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And so, yeah, it took a year and a half to actually get them planted. So there's some time involved, but certainly in that time frame, my specialty is as a fisheries and wildlife biologist, but my specialty is knowledge of vegetation. So if anybody has any concerns or interests, like to send me an email, I'd be glad to help them out, because part of the stormwater design for these old basins is directly correlated to the types of species of trees and shrubs that you plant there. And one thing I will tell everyone, you cannot plant woody trees or shrubs in man-made berms. It damages the integrity of the waterproof core. So where we planted trees and shrubs on the banks, they were excavated banks into natural soils. We cannot plant any earthen built engineered banks, because you can allow herbaceous to grow, but you're not allowed to leave woody plants to grow in man-made berms. So that's an important issue to look at the basin. And if it's all berms, then you're only allowed to plant the bottom. If it's excavated into virgin soil, you can plant the banks as well as the bottom. So there's some engineering behind it, vegetation design behind it. So it's not something you just flip a switch and do. It's something that takes a little bit of time work with a school district and a variety of different steps in the process.
Okay. So in your collaboration and coordination with the school, do they have any concerns about planting the basins?
Their concerns weren't necessarily, the primary concerns was public concerns, image complaints about not keeping them up. There wasn't really a concern about the basins turning into vegetation. And that's one of the reasons in my first meeting, I brought the maintenance supervisor to the meeting, because they're the people you have to stop them from mowing. And so the only concerns you have is there's not so much any liabilities with doing this, but the liability of sliding a tractor down the bank into the mud and tipping it over, or getting a tractor stuck in the mud. So I played the maintenance issue against the benefits of meeting the MS4 and planting the basins. So I brought the maintenance people's concerns of maintaining these basins and said, I'll reduce your work. So it's a great mechanism to bring people to the table and say, you mean we don't have to mow in the mud anymore? Yeah, I'm all for it. And, you know, so there was concerns, but I quelled those with all the benefits that they're going to get from it. And since it was the first one I've done, there's things I could have done better, but I certainly have moved forward with, like I said, fast growing trees. Bring the maintenance team or the maintenance supervisor to your initial meeting with the school district. And I had a list of points that would benefit the school district when I initiated an email conversation with school staff members and board members to get everybody on board. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. Every school is different. You may have different concerns and interest or problems that may arise in the process, but certainly think on your feet and be prepared with answers is a good way to approach the schools.
Okay. So, so from that note, are you planning to vegetate any basin or any other basins on school grounds, or any other similar projects in the future? Have you identified any schools that you'd like to work with?
I do, and since I'm still in negotiations with them, I don't want to bring up their names right now, but one is on a Class A brown trout fishery, and one of the top brown trout fisheries in the state. And so the interest to diminish water temperatures and clean up waters before they go to the Lackawanna River really puts us in perhaps I'll bring Trout Unlimited members to aid in the planting, or get Trout Unlimited to aid in the financing of the project. So I've got two other schools that are very interested. They're apprehensive. A third school has discussed it with me, and it's been the sound of crickets since we discussed it. So in some cases, people look at you quite puzzled, wondering why you're doing this. And that's when you try to reach out to the biology teachers and the chemistry teachers or sciences teachers to get your foot in the door. People that actually educate about the environment are great help in reaching school board members and upper executives within a school district, because they understand where you're going with this. The other people are based in education for a variety of reasons. And like I said, the maintenance staff is always a great benefit because it's that much less they have to mow in extreme slopes and muddy conditions. So, you have to gauge your audience in the school district and go to them with the right tools of why it's good for your school district. And all of a sudden the lights go off when you reach out to these different school districts.
I think that's great, John. Thank you. And I'm very interested in the temperature. I think that's an interesting element to me as well. I'm in North Carolina, and I've worked a lot with a professor at NC State, Bill Hunt, who's done quite a bit of research on temperature, and that's been a very intriguing element to Western North Carolina, where we also have some really trout waters there that draw folks in from all over the country to come and trout fish. So I think there's that tourist economic element to it that I think you're touching on there, with one, the reduction in maintenance, but then also we are protecting a natural resource that does draw people into the region. So, and I think that it's Trout in Leamington was interested. I want to say some of the research that Bill did, he also had some interest from Bass Pro Shops and other groups like that that have some interest in trout fishing and the incentives for that.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, your outdoors sport fishery people are a major player in this, in interest in seeing it happening, because it benefits the sport that they love, the bass fishermen, the trout fishermen, you know, and bringing them to aid in one way or another, whether it be financially or if you find out that there's a teacher from the school district that is a Bass Masters member or Trout Unlimited member, it's really important. Now, I'm not saying that the water temperatures are going to drop in these basins to below 68 degrees in the dead of summer, but at least they're not 140 degrees coming off of blacktop. And so anywhere that we can reduce temperatures before it goes to a cold water or even a warm water fishery, from extreme blacktop pavement and black rubber roofs, you're doing a benefit even for warm water species with the extreme temperatures that come off of summer paves and roofs, and you know, let alone the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment that you're trapping in these basins is really a benefit. And certainly, you know, once again, if you're near any natural environment, the volunteers of the amphibians is a key player in keeping mosquito populations at a bare minimum. There's not too many cattail stands I walk through that don't have mosquitoes, and we have such a frog population in these basins that, and toads, I suspect that they're consuming the nymphal mosquitoes. I've done dips there to see, and the mosquitoes are not present. So I'm not saying there are none in the system, but I've seen a lot more man-made structures that are loaded with mosquito larvae versus a storm basin that's planted in vegetation with waters impounded in cattail stands, and I don't find the mosquito numbers. So, you know, that's a real common complaint. Everybody says, oh, mosquitoes will be there. Well, I agree to a certain point, but if you can maintain amphibian populations in locations, and you know, these volunteered for me in this basin and other locations that I'm looking at, I'm anticipating that populations of amphibians are in the surrounding forests, and hopefully we get the same reproduction of amphibians in these basins, keep mosquitoes attenuated.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a great point. I think all of that ties back to the triple bottom line evaluations that we include in some of our master planning. I think that's great example of some of the social and economic benefits that come along with implementing some of these practices. So, and I hear the same thing quite a bit. We've put in a few wetlands in eastern North Carolina, and that's always the concern. It's usually mosquitoes first, snakes usually are on the list somewhere. So that's, I make the same point. The mosquitoes might be there, but so will the mosquito predators. A lot of attracts dragonflies and birds, and like I said, the amphibians. I think that it's interesting.
Well, I think I'm not a herpetologist, but certainly you could probably approach local herpetologists near a new basin planning idea or concept and see if they could aid you in importing some frog eggs and toad eggs, depending upon the habitat that's surrounding the area, and see if you can establish a population. They're certainly not going to hurt anything. And if it takes off, then you've taken a location that may not have had a population in a number of years and attenuate your mosquitoes, but also create some new biology that the local students haven't seen. I mean, as a child, I played in wetlands my whole childhood, but now as I'm getting older, there's some areas are suburban and urban areas now with virtually no populations. On a school campus property, if you can get them back to those locations, you add another fold of beneficial improvements, bringing amphibians back to an area that may not be there anymore. So there's ideas in the back of my mind in more urban-like surroundings where we could put the storm basins in and perhaps introduce toad and frog eggs to the basins and see if we can get off the ground with bringing a new population back to an area that's been eradicated.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of benefits from implementing these practices. So I also do want to point out as well that the EPA did a developed guidance document for integrating green infrastructure onto school campuses. So Liz Odinger has put a link to that reference and resource in the chat if some of you would like to take a look at that. So I think this accounts for integrating the practices, but also this also steps through the 6 minimum control measures that they evaluate and implementing the practices. It also talks about some of the benefits connecting the resource to the schools, and then so the environmental benefits of implementing GSI in schools, but then there's also a lot of social benefits from the educational opportunities that they provide. Okay. So we do have a few more minutes. If there's any more questions for John, so please at this point feel free to unmute and join the conversation. Can also help if you want to just either put in more questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Also, I think we can. Well, maybe not. I'll say we can also help unmute if you need us to, but I'm not sure that we can do that.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to add, John?
No, I'm just thank you for listening to me. We've got some. I think the most important part with MS4 is trying to think outside of the box, not craziness, but how do we make things work in existing conditions when we didn't think about all of these issues pertaining to water quality? Think outside of the box when you see something that you think, well, that stormwater system or facility isn't built in modern times. How can we make it better? And that's how I came up with the idea, and I moved forward with it. And it's working very well. We're 3 years out. But certainly, be patient with it. But by all means, drop me an email. My email's right here on the present screen. Drop me an email if you have any questions on species, vegetation. There's a whole gamut of herbaceous and shrub and tree species that could be used in storm basins at different variations. And also make sure you talk to the school district about the use of salt and anti-skid, because in some cases you have to prepare your vegetation types for the high levels of salt. So, you can kind of check that with the sodium tests in the existing storm basins, because that can create problems for certain species of vegetation. So, walk in with your eyes open and your brain thinking about all different aspects, and I'd be glad to help you out if I can.
Okay, thank you, John. So I did get to say this in the beginning due to some unfortunate technical difficulties, but do again thank John for taking the time to participate. And so all of our presenters through this virtual event have agreed to participate and focus on based on their experiences. So all of the presentations here are developed to focus on the permittee's experience as they work to meet through the conditions of the Pennsylvania MS4 permit. So all the presenters, including John, have volunteered their time to share this information to serve as a learning opportunity for their fellow permittees and local decision makers. So definitely thank you, John, for your time, and to all of our other presenters as well. So unless there are other questions or anything else anyone would like to add, which doesn't look like it, other than another thank you to John. So I think at this point we can, like the other sessions, we can leave this session or this meeting, and believe our next one is on where to go. I think our next session is about what to expect during a Pennsylvania audit. So this one is not when you log into this one, will be the full session. I don't believe we have the introduction and then the session. So you'll log into that and you'll hear from Jamie Erberl and Chuck Shadle about what to expect during an audit. I'll see you all over there.